You are now watching ZACLASAGE, the best place to learn about competitive Pokemon TCG. Let's get it! Yo, what's poppin' YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. ZACLASAGE here. Word up! Today we're going to be covering over the top 10 decks of the Chilling Reign format. So these have actually been calculated based on the results on the Play Limitless website, along with my own predictions and takes on it. But mainly, we've had a full solid week of events, and now we can see what the top 10 decks actually are. A lot of you were like, last week, how did Blizzy make the list? How did this deck make the list? How did Metagross make the list? Sometimes you gotta make it up as you go along, and I explained that in the video, but this is all calculated data from Limitless, along with some of my own predictions and personal takes. So I mean, I think this is going to be an awesome list, and if you're looking to find out what's the best decks from Chilling Reign, this is a great place to start. So check it out. The lists are all in the pinned comment below. You can copy and paste those right into PTCGO. I've also left video references for many of them, and I'm going to be creating the other video references if I don't have them up yet. While you're there, check out the description of this video. You can pick up some ZACLASAGE merch, a ZACLASAGE playmat. All that stuff does help me as a content creator, make it as a living. Appreciate it. If that's not your style, or you're just balling on a budget, or you don't want to feel like giving Zach some money, that's totally cool. I don't expect anything from anyone, but feel free to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We just passed 4550, so we are less than 500 peeps away from 5,000. Be huge to get there. Tell your friends about the channel, all that good stuff. But you want to what? Let's jump into number 10 here on our power rankings and see exactly what's going on. Jumping into our number 10 spot, we have BLAZIKEN ZERAORA, and this deck's been doing all right at some of these online events. It seems like Kristen Fontenot has basically been playing this deck to the most success of everyone, and it's one of those things where this deck is just really cute when it comes to the synergy. You got the Max Blaze, power up the ZERAORA does damage to the bench, then you got Pissimian and Telescopic Sight to do damage to the bench, or you can use Octillery to search out an Echoing Horn. It is a rapid strike card to bring back one of your opponent's basic Pokemon and then proceed to knock it out. I mean, this deck's been seeing a little bit of success. Maybe it can see some more success. There are quite a few LUCMETAL decks out there, so maybe having BLAZIKEN being fire type might be a plus, especially since they're not playing Coding Metal. However, I do find that this deck can clunk up a little bit with it being such a wombo combo of the BLAZIKEN VMAX, and then you have to attack with a Rapid Strike, then attack with ZERAORA V. Hope your opponent doesn't have a Mew. Hope for a lot of things. When you're putting hopes and potentials and other what-ifs, that's where a deck can just struggle a little bit. Now, I do think this deck's probably top 10 material. Again, last week's, I'm not even going to go previously or anything on there. So if you wonder what the rating was last week, I did rate this one number 10. It is actually number 10. Will it be number 10 again? I'm not entirely sure, so I won't be doing any previously for last week, but going forward we will have that. I think that this deck's going to stay lower top 10 going forward. Sure, the deck exists, but I don't think a lot of peeps are going to play it, just because I think there's probably more secure just decks out there. The concept's cool, but I think there's more secure concepts out there. Jumping into our number 9 spot, we got PIKAROM. Now, PIKAROM's all dressed up shiny with its new Path to the Peak version. So instead of going with the Mewtwo Mews, you're going with just the PIKAROMs and the Raichu, Alolan Raichu GX. And I mean, a lot of this deck seems to work. This is based heavily off of Azul's 9th place list at Chill. Rip that bubble. But this is very similar to the Pikachu and Zekrom Plants deck with Power Plant that was seeing success about a year ago. Now it's one of those things where this deck, you got Bolton, power up your Pokemon, Path to the Peak, block your opponent's abilities. Maybe when your opponent bumps the peak, that's when you play the Dedenne GX or you drop your Marshadow. Right now, I currently think that I like Pokegear more than I like Electromagnetic Radar. Maybe Electromagnetic Radar is going to be the better card overall. I think Pikachu Zekrom is kind of on its last legs here. Really where Path to the Peak was shutting off Mewtwo. That gives you even a worse Rapid Strike matchup. And this deck does okay against some other decks, but it doesn't necessarily always take it to the top. Now, I don't want to talk too early about PIKAROM, because anytime I think this deck dies out, it ends up becoming really good again. Anytime this deck is really good again, it ends up dying out. Pikachu and Zekrom GX is a teeter-totter of emotions, and I think for right now, I'm going to put it lower top 10, just because I don't think the list is figured out. Maybe it's just going to fizzle out of the format. Maybe players are going to stick to other decks. Maybe there's going to be a better version of Pikachu Zekrom, or maybe it's going to be a more traditional Pikachu Zekrom Mewtwo deck like I won the Players Cup with. We'll have to see exactly what's going on in this deck. Right now, I'm personally staying away from this one just because its matchup spread scares me a lot in this format. Jumping into our number 8 spot, we got Grass Mewtwo. Now, Grass Mewtwo really off the heels of 76ers winning the Hyperlux Monday event, getting some of that sweet cash. But is this deck still worth it? I'm honestly not sure. I feel like 76ers plays a lot of Grass Mewtwo or just Rillaboom, Rowegg kind of decks, and this early success of the week on Monday didn't really live up to the hype, and it barely squeaked into our top 10. So it's making me question if this is actually a top 10 inclusion, or if this is kind of a rollover of last formats where players are not accurately getting the cards that they need to build these new decks. So Shadow Rider, of course, is on this list. Surprise, surprise, we haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's a little bit higher on this list. No leaks, but maybe 76ers would have played Shadow Rider Calyrex or Ice Rider Calyrex or one of the other top decks if they were able to acquire the cards. Now that's a question that maybe I could just DM 76ers about, and maybe it's something where Grass Mewtwo was legitimately a good call. I know that I played against 76ers in this event. I don't even remember what I was playing. I think I might have been playing Shadow Rider Calyrex. It didn't fare well for me, but it's one of those things, or I think I was playing ADP. Sometimes these decks just have really awkward matchups, and the new decks don't always beat the old decks. So maybe this deck is lower top 10. I'd say if anything is lower top 10 because the Mewtwo and Mew gets shut out by Path to the Peak. And that's a lot of P words. It's one of those things where this deck seems cool. You got to play extra Chaotic Swell instead of Wondrous Lab, so it lost a couple tricks. Otherwise, this deck basically remains the same with almost every single count. Is this deck still good? Yeah, it's not bad. It can definitely compete with some of the decks. And I mean, there's a lot of cool tips and tricks, but maybe there's going to be other versions. I've seen Dark Mewtwo decks with Galarian Moltres pop up a little bit. Maybe once those pick up a little bit of steam, or more players can acquire Galarian Moltres V, which are still quite expensive on the PTCGO trades. Maybe this would be something that would take this spot. So again, I'm going to put this deck comfortably at the bottom 10 of the lower half of the bottom 10. So the 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of thing going for next week, and it might eventually trickle off of our list. Jumping into number 7, we have Decidueye. Now, Decidueye tore up the Limitless Invitational. There was a lot of strong players who were playing in that event, and this list was heavily based off of the list that a lot of players were playing. I mean, I think a lot of players came to a similar understanding of what a Decidueye list looks like. Now, I have to ask myself a whole bunch of questions when it comes like this. And I mean, first and foremost, I think Decidueye, I mean, not even a question, let's just start off with a fact. Decidueye is very good in a format where Decidueye is very good. And that sounds silly in and of itself, but if peeps aren't running proper counters to this deck, Decidueye is going to sit there with its Deep Forest Camo ability and stop VMAX, GX Pokemon from doing anything. And a lot of decks, you're just going to sit there and you're going to walk into an auto win. I've seen it happen so many times before, and these wall decks do very good when they're supposed to be doing very good. Now, with this deck seeing a lot of success, I mean, enough for it to be number 7, and all the top decks are just literally the decks that every single person plays over and over and over. I know you hate to see it, but it's the ADPs, the E-Turns, the Shadow Riders. I mean, there's a lot of decks here that have not been featured yet that see a lot of play. But is Decidueye going to see more play? Yeah, people want to replicate success, but the issue is the more play Decidueye sees, the worse it is, because peeps are going to start countering it. Your auto wins are no longer auto wins, and as soon as you hit a deck that has counters Decidueye, it's almost an auto loss. So it's one of those things where it's an often balance of Decidueye is very good when it's very good. It peaks up a little bit. It might have already peaked up this weekend, and then it crashes and burns to where it's the worst play possible. And that's where peeps are teching Cresselias in their Shadow Riders, and they're teching Volcanions in their Victini decks, and they're just teching a whole bunch. So Decidueye is not necessarily going to stay in our top 10 forever, at least in my opinion. If anything, it's always going to be a lower bottom 10 card or bottom 10 deck, and really kind of die off at some point. So it's either going to spike probably to where it's the 6, 5, 4, or the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spot, so lower top 10, and then it's going to fall off completely where it's like a top 20 deck or not even played. My other question is Altaria better? I've asked a few peeps, and I mean, Decidueye has more HP, Decidueye has more attacking potential, but Altaria also saw more success last format than Decidueye ever did. So that's my question to everyone. Let me know in the comments below if you think Altaria is better than Decidueye. Let's jump into number 6. Jumping into our number 6 spot is ADPZ with a Galarian Zapdos tech. So this deck really got popularized after Gabriel Smart won the PTCG Sunday series. And this deck's been okay since. The Zapdos basically solves the Eternatus matchup, but this deck still struggles to Shadow Rider a little bit. It's one of those things that you might want to add a Marshadow into this deck just to get around Path to the Peak. You might want to change up a few things. Now, I have seen some players teching in Galarian Moltres into this deck. That might improve the Shadow Rider matchup a little bit. Honestly, not entirely sure. I still have a lot of testing to do in this format, and I mean, anytime I feel like I get a solidified grasp on the format, something changes. So I mean, I think I'm going to struggle with Chilling Reign for a while, and then I'm probably going to do a little bit better in the middle. Trust me, maybe I'm just giving myself the false hope that I need or confidence that I need, but right now I'm still in my struggle period with this format. I mean, this looks like a typical ADP list. The only new tricks that I got were Galarian Zapdos V, Echoing Horn. I've seen and tested a few lists with Peony, but this is really where a basic list is going to look like. ADPs probably, if anything, could go up a little bit more. Number 6 seems a little bit low, but it depends if the other top decks can continuously do well. So I'd say ADP in this current format is probably more of a mid-tier deck, unless of course something really gets figured out with its matchup spread. Jumping into our number 5 spot, we got Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX. Now, this is a deck at the halfway point, and I mean, I think it's one of those decks that seems pretty spot on. This deck seems like it's going to be upper top 10 deck, so anywhere 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, depending on the amount of play and success that it sees. This deck has a decent answer to a lot of things because it has Phoebe, it's got Path to the Peak, it's relatively easy to play, it's consistent with MEWTWO and Melanie and Ride of the High, like its attacks are just good with Max Lance. I mean, if I ever saw a good beatdown consistent deck, this is a deck that I really like. If you're new to the game, putting Path to the Peak in play, hitting hard with Max Lance is a really easy strategy to deploy. Now, you might have a couple of tough turns later on in the game, but the basic strategy of hitting hard with Ice Rider Calyrex VMAX under Path to the Peak, using Melanie to power up your Pokemon, is going to prove to be timeless, at least until rotation happens. And I mean, I think that this is a pretty solid list. In general, a lot of cards are not rotating, so if you're one of those players who's getting excited for post-rotation, this is probably one of those good builds that you could play most of the cards going forward. So I mean, this deck looks hot. I think it's been performing well. I really like a lot of the inclusions, especially Phoebe, to get around things like Decidueye. This deck seems really cool, and I think it's going to probably stay within, again, the upper echelon of the top 10, so the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Jumping into our number 4 spot, we got LUCMETAL, and this is a deck that I previously said it was bad. I think I'm going to take that back and say that I think this deck's a little bit better than I originally thought. So my thought process on why I thought it was bad is because Path to the Peak stops Zamazenta V, which stops Dauntless Shields, which means that your opponent's VMAX can go through it. Not a lot of VMAX decks are running Path to the Peak. I mean, sure, you're going to see some Shadow Riders and Ice Riders, but not every deck can afford to run that card. Additionally, there's not a lot of fire in this format, and I look back to past season where I saw a lot of success with LUCMETAL myself, and most of my losses came to fire. When there's no fire, I did very well, and I mean, I probably held about an 80% win percentage for the short bit of time that I played LUCMETAL. This deck also took me to 2nd place in North America for the Players' Cup. I mean, this deck did very well for me. So I think going forward, using my expertise on this deck, I think this build seems okay. H/V is mainly for Decidueye, just the tech of the week. If you don't expect Decidueye or Decidueye dies down, feel free to cut it out, and then you could add in a 4th Pokegear. Beyond that, the list is pretty similar between Jake Gearhart and Joshua Sutherland's list. Most players have agreed that this is just a better way to play the deck because you don't need to play the Coating Metal energies because there's no fire, and that means you don't need to play Guzmahala, and that means you don't need to play Tag Call, and basically you get to just a more traditional version of LUCMETAL. So if anything, I think this deck's probably going to stay within the top 5 decks for sure, unless of course we start to see some fire decks enter the top 10. Jumping into our number 3 spot, we got ETERNATUS VMAX. ETERNATUS VMAX gained the new trick of Galarian Moltres V, and that's really where Galarian Moltres and Energy Switch took place for Crushing Hammers. This deck does no longer have to slow down other Eternatus or any other decks, and it's not really worried about Crushing Hammer either because you got Galarian Moltres V. Now it's one of those things, you can get all your energies back really quickly, you get a new attacker in Galarian Moltres V, which helps you out against LUCMETAL decks, and this deck does particularly well against Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. Of course, avoid those Galarian Zapdos V, no one's really running Avery yet, and I mean, you also want to just avoid fighting type cards in general. So this deck, being a little fragile in the metagame, it ends up doing really well because, as you can see, we haven't seen our dark type weak Pokemon yet. Shadow Rider is definitely within the top 2. Guess what spot it is? You can pause the video, let me know in the comments below what spot you think Shadow Rider is in, and if you fast forward a little bit, let me know what spot you think it should be in, or your thoughts on the deck in general. I mean, this deck looks pretty simple if you ask me. I think this deck's probably going to stay top 5, unless of course we see a bunch of Galarian Zapdos V techs to just really slow it down. And I mean, a lot of players are getting their hands on Galarian Zapdos V just because its fighting type in Eternatus is popular. I know that I've been personally playing a couple copies in most of my lists. Maybe I just have some kind of grudge against Eternatus VMAX for all the times that it's burned me. There's times that you think you just grab a Pokemon off a research to 7 and you draw into all non-Pokemon cards. So let me know what you think about that, but jumping into our number 2 spot should be exciting. Jumping into our number 2 spot, we have Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX. Now, I actually combined both Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX and Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX Inteleon into one category just to make it a little bit easier. Now, the Inteleon version, based off my math, did a little bit better than the traditional build, but whether you're playing the Jirachi build that took Azul all the way to winning the Players' Cup 3, or if you're running the kind of Jake Gearhart-inspired Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX with Inteleon, both are going to be quite viable in this format. I personally like the Inteleon build because it allows me to grab everything that I want out with shady dealings on Drizzile, and then of course I get that quick shooting snipe with Inteleon. Part of me just screams that options are going to be very good, and of course this deck has some strong matchups in the form of PIKAROM, Eternatus VMAX, and of course there's a bunch of other decks on this list that this deck can do well against. And if you ask Jake Gearhart and myself, this deck can hold its own against Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX, so you heard it here first. Rapid Strike URSHIFU VMAX seems quite good. Spreading damage and pinpointing the Pokemon you want to knock out is never a bad idea, and if you look at all these different options, you could rip them out of your deck with shady dealings. If you are playing the traditional version of this deck with Jirachi and all those things, you have a similar chance of grabbing things, but you don't get to cherry pick things that you want out of your deck. You gotta be at the mercy of Jirachi Stellar Wish ability. So that's the reason why I'm like pro Drizzile right now. And of course you got the option to use Inteleon as well. So I found a lot of success with this version. Maybe it's going to be the worst version. We're going to find out. I think this deck's going to stay within our top 5 decks, probably our top 3 decks right now. Really, it does struggle a little bit with Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX because you do have the Psychic weakness. But the versions that are seeing success aren't playing Path to the Peak, which means that they're not necessarily shutting off your Jirachi GX, which means that you can shut off your weakness. So maybe this deck will see a little bit more success. We'll have to see, only time can tell. Jumping into our number 1 spot, we got Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX. This version has proven itself to be more successful than the Mewtwo variant, than the Trevnor Path to the Peak variant, and of course the Alcremie VMAX Cake Rider variant. The Zapdos version gives you answers against Eternatus VMAX, and Genki, of course, is just a solid tech. So this version is super simple, where you're just attaching energies with Underworld Door, building things up. You use Zapdos against things where Zapdos is good against, and then you could use Gengar Mimikyu when your opponent has a big hand. I personally really like how this deck plays out. You're just drawing a lot of cards, very similar between a Malamar and a Zoroark GX deck, and both of those being tier 1 decks at some point tells me that this deck being a tier 1 deck is no different. Now, I do want to point out that this deck got 3 times as many points as the 2nd place deck, and it almost got as many points as the 3rd through 10th place deck all combined. So this deck has just been absolutely killing events. So for those who got Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX, they're sitting at the top tables because this deck is carrying a lot of players naturally. It's very consistent. We have solid builds, especially if you look at this list. This list looks like a very solid build. one metric that I just like looking at a deck is if you ever looked at a World Championship winning deck, there's a lot of correct counts, 4 ofs, and in key count like 3 ofs, and decks just are built like to draw the cards that you need, and they have a lot of like natural built-in things. Read that as like Fog Crystal, have answers to their most opposing decks. So this deck has an answer to Eternatus with Galarian Zapdos V. This deck seemingly has it all. It looks very World Championship winning vibes. I know we don't have a World Championships coming up, but if we did, this deck would probably win our World Championships. So until we find a counter to the Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX deck, this is the build to have. The biggest issue that I have with this build is probably that it struggles to mirror match. I don't necessarily like the mirror match when I play this deck. I think that it just comes down to whoever gets a bunch of Underworld doors off and can attack first, or maybe stop their opponent with a Horror House GX and Poltergeist. Like, there's a lot of like cheesy things that happen in that matchup. So hopefully there is a way to make the mirror more skill-based, but we'll have to see. Right now, this deck is really where it's at. So if you haven't picked them up online, I totally recommend picking them up. Use code ZELASAGE5 at PTCGO store if you're looking for that extra bit of discount. Anything helps. And that's what we got going on for our power ranking. Shadow Riders just absolutely galloping all the way to the top. Is there anything that's going to stop it? I mean, maybe we'll see Eternatus turn up, or maybe we're going to see more Decidueye. It's honestly one of those things, though, where maybe Shadow Rider's just really good, and if you aren't playing it, maybe you should pick up some codes. It's one of those things where it's just not always a fun time just spending a bunch of money on codes and then spending a bunch of packs online to grab all of these Shadow Riders. But it is what it is, and that's what it is. So we'll see if it continues to ride at the top, or maybe we're going to see another deck take its spot and it's going to get countered out. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. Feel free to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to check out the pinned comment below with all the lists and reference points. All the videos are there if you ever need any little bit of tips or tricks. If you are looking for anything additional, feel free to reach out to me. I do offer personal coaching. It is not free. A lot of people ask me if it's free. Unfortunately, it's not free. I'm not in a position to do that yet, but there's a lot of great things going on there. So feel free to DM me if you need anything else. That being said, I gotta go edit this one. It's a lot of editing for these videos. So I'll catch up with everyone later. Have yourself a wonderful day. Peace out. I want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's become a channel member. It's one of those things where I appreciate every single person who watches my videos, and I mean, that's really where it counts, but for the channel members, they've gone out of their way to financially support me, and I truly appreciate that gesture. It's one of those things when I started channel memberships up on my channel, and I just didn't know if anyone was ever going to do it, so I truly appreciate everyone taking the plunge, taking a leap of trust, and investing in me as a content creator. Truly makes a difference for me each and every month. If you haven't already thought about becoming a channel member, you might want to contribute to the channel, and I do put everything back into the channel to make it the best possible place to watch for Pokemon TCG content. Again, I truly appreciate everyone. Thank you so much. Cheers. I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your day to watch this video. It means the world to me. And my goal with this channel is to spread my love of the game and knowledge with our entire Pokemon TCG community. If you haven't already, help signal boost this video to other Pokemon TCG fans by liking it, sharing it with your friends, and subscribing to the channel. Hopefully we reach our goals really soon. Check out this recommended video, and have yourself a great day. Thanks.